Hi, this is Lee J with another episode of the Eco Cafe podcast. I'm here with another American to share his unique perspective on how he ended up in Uzbekistan. So why don't you just briefly introduce yourself?
Oh, I don't speak English.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm actually from New York, but I'm living in Tashkent a bit over a year now. And before that, I worked in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So I guess you could say I'm half American, half Central Asian at this point.
So I'd say, what brought you to Uzbekistan specifically?
Well, uh, I was working in Tajikistan many years. I was trying to move to ever since I visited Tashkent actually under the previous regime, and that wasn't so great. But ever since the new regime took over and everything opened up, it became much easier and a lot of opportunities. So I've actually been trying to move to Tashkent for many years, and then I thought I was going to. Then COVID hit, and I was home in New York, and then I moved here, like say a year or more ago. And one of my philosophies that I believe in that's very important is to be in a country when it first opens up. I think that's. I'll give you an example. Like I started studying Russian in college during Perestroika and Glasnost when the Soviet Union first opened up. Uh, and I actually worked in Tajikistan, and the Tajik language is very similar to Farsi of Iran and Dari of Afghanistan. And I decided to learn Farsi for when Iran one day opens up. And here, this country only opened up recently. So what you see is, for example, if I stayed in the U.S. and I love the U.S., but I don't have tech mind like Zuckerberg, so I'm not going to be inventing the next Facebook. So how am I going to differentiate myself from masses or move up the ladder? It's going to be very difficult because most of these niches were, solved in the U.S. 50, 100 years ago in the rest of the world. But there's a lot of niches here that haven't been filled yet. So there's a lot of opportunities to do things here that the rest of the world did before. So I think I'll stop there.
No, I agree. I keep saying that this is probably one of the best places in the world to be right now.
That's why okay. So now he gets me.
Yeah.
Most people say to me, what the hell are you doing? Even the taxi drivers here, but even in the U.S., they say, well, why don't you stay here?
Right.
Well, I'm just going to have an office slave job. And here, there's just so many different things you get into and do because of the newness and the eagerness of the population to move forward. So that's why I happen to agree. I advise, frankly, that this is one of the best places in the world to be now. And probably a place like sub-Saharan Africa because it's probably going through a lot of the sin. That's where you want to be. That's where you get an impact. That's where you can do a lot of things and fill niches. And I just give an example. I'd say, for example, the time to be in Japan and Germany was in the 50s, right? The time to be in China was in the 80s and the 90s. China now didn't know what they were doing. Now they know they don't need us. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to be where they need you, and here they'll still need us for 10, 15 years. So thank God.
And someone else that I recently met said the same thing, like basically same thing as being in Dubai like 30 years ago.
Right.
So we are where we need to be right now.
Exactly. Dubai doesn't need us now. And I'm not saying I wouldn't move there. I'm just saying that, 30 years ago, exactly, would have been the time to be.
But I want to talk. So obviously, we're both Americans, and I get the same thing every time,
Right.
I'm on a Yandex, and then somebody asks me where you're from. I say United States, and like, oh, great. They're so excited and happy. And then they often
Right.
ask me, why
Would you come here?
Why are we here? So I want to say, so I was born in New York City. You're born in New York City.
Right.
I have a New York City birth certificate, but I grew up in Southern California. I'm all over the country.
And we don't hold it against
Hey,
you. Stealing our Dodgers.
as I said, I was raised by a Brooklyn Dodgers fan.
So was I.
So I have to hate the Yankees forever and Mets by default. And I was, Queens birth certificate.
Right.
So why I bring that up to is interesting perspective. Everybody feel like what would you tell people that they have their expectations they think of New York City? What would you say is a realistic view of New York City as a New Yorker to at least Uzbekistan people?
Well, it's actually interesting because Russian, you hear Russian on every street now in Manhattan. And I actually now only stop people with an Asian face when I hear them speaking Russian. I say, they're from Central Asia. You hear that too. But actually, there are pretty much pure Central Asian neighborhoods now in Brooklyn and Queens by now. I mean, we have tons. We have tons of people from the region. So it seems like every taxi driver has a relative who got a green card, won a green card, and lives in New York. And everybody wants to move there. And one thing I would just say is it's great, of course, but I think sometimes there's this thing that the streets are just paved with gold, and you just have to move there, and everything's just going to magically happen for you.
That's the very
And they don't
one-sided,
understand
right?
how expensive it is.
Yes,
So,
the one-sided good marketing. I mean, I knew
yeah.
somebody who worked in New York City in the fashion industry,
Mm,
living in Manhattan, paying $5,000 a month for like a small apartment,
exactly.
and then imagine it's the pandemic and you can't even go outside.
Right,
So,
right.
it has its good qualities, but also has its realistic qualities, I
Exactly,
guess is the best way to describe it.
exactly. So it's great. You can find every language, every culture, every nationality. And I say one of the things, for example, if you go to a neighborhood in Queens, you might see a Bosnian restaurant next to a Mexican restaurant, next to a Yemeni restaurant, next to Ghana. So there's just so much happening there, and you just feel the energy of it. But um, streets are not paved with gold anywhere. You go to
Well, I was going to say, like, I've a lot of familiar with Sunnyside section
yeah,
or Long Island City of
yeah,
Queens, and everybody likes Manhattan, but I think it's like, I'll be honest, you'd say it overrated and mostly expensive.
yeah. I don't. I have to be frank. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I don't understand why. I mean, I live in Manhattan, but I don't
yeah,
understand why people pay so much money for
right.
that.
Especially on the subway, you're like in Queens in like 20 minutes.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
like you said, tons of great restaurants. In fact, once I decided I was coming to Uzbekistan, like you said, there actually is a big Uzbekistan community in New York City. I went to a restaurant, The Taste of Samarkand,
And there's
obviously.
lots. Yeah,
Yeah, and
I
it's
was
great.
already going in '90s.
Yeah.
First two came with Bukharan Jews, and actually, I'm living in Manhattan, and all the haircutters on the street are foreign Jews. It's like a lot of immigrant groups in the U.S. will take a certain economic niche. For example, Koreans were known for the grocery stores. Interesting in New York, Tibetans. If you go to the farmers markets, there a lot of the people who are working there are Tibetans, and that's been going on for years. I mean, just different niches, and so it seems like Bukharan Jews, one of the niches they took is being hair cutters in New York. So it's fascinating how it happens. And something else is interesting, the pizzerias, a lot of them, I think, I don't know, are not Italian run anymore because the Italians moved up, you know, and now they may be owned by Serbs or Albanians or Greeks or God knows what. And they were talking about in the sushi restaurants that the sushi chefs are like from El Salvador or so because the Japanese kind of moved, and they don't want to do that anymore. They moved it to some other niche or something. So I think that's a very fascinating thing as well.
So I think it's time to wind things down. My last question for you today
Oh,
is, what do you hope to get the most out of your time here in Uzbekistan?
very nice. Well, one thing that is really nice here in Tashkent is the mix of the nationalities and the people and so on. And, you feel very welcome here. You feel the aura is very good here. The people are very welcoming. And one interesting thing for me is I moved here kind of when the Russians did for different reasons. But I joined a lot of these groups on Telegram, and so like here, we meet the Echo Cafe here. Through this, I'm doing yoga. I just came, why I'm like this. I just came from the gym. I'm doing workouts. So a lot of these initiatives started after the Russians kind of moved here, and so on. So it's very nice to meet people here. I have a lot of good friends and acquaintances here. And for me, what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to do what I said, which is to fill some of the niches here. So, just as a quick background, in Tajikistan, I was on the board of directors of AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce, which is like in 100 something countries. And I founded and ran something called Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is in 200 countries, and also Women's Entrepreneurship Day there. So we were heavily involved, I'd say, in developing startup ecosystem. So here I'm kind of building on that. I'm working for an organization called CIPE, Center for International Private Enterprise, CIPE, which is an American organization, on their IBECA, Improving Business Environment in Central Asia program. And one of the, we're working on business reforms in different sectors of the economy. But one of the also things is uh, U.S. government has a program called C5+1. That's 5 Central Asian countries and one the U.S. And the President Biden met the at C5+1 at the UN meetings in September in New York, and they announced new initiative B5+1 and CIPE as the implementer, and that is to kind of increase private sector interaction between the U.S. and Central Asia, and that builds on what I did with AmCham in Tajikistan. I'm mentoring startups for Startup Weekend Tashkent, and now I'm in the process of starting a consulting firm with a local colleague. And what we're trying to do is fill some of these niches. We're going to have some projects in HR, in business optimization and ESG, and also working with potential investors, retailers, franchisers who want to come into this market and say import and export of commodities, a bunch of these types of things. So, just the last thing I'll say is,
Yeah. Hey, we're like I said, we're New Yorkers. We know how to talk. We know how to talk. Yeah.
Like if I stayed in the West, like who would need any of this? This was all done 50 years ago. All these niches were filled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here, there's chance to do these things, and it's not rocket science. As I say, I don't have a mind that's going to invent the next great tech thing. So that's why we're here. And I also last quick thing is another game changer when this new regime took over was that in the previous days the Central Asian countries didn't have good relations. They weren't even direct flights, and now it's great because the countries are basically getting along in the region. And so we hope that we start with Uzbekistan, but we work in the Central Asian region as a whole. So that's my talk, and thank you.
Well, thank you. Sounds like you have an ambitious agenda. I'm sure you'll do fantastic. So thanks for joining. Handshake, and see you next time on the Eco Cafe podcast.